Hi everyone, we are back with Post Grad with Asha, and today we're going to talk about the National Counselor Exam, Counseling Skills and Interventions, Section 5. So some of you are new to this channel, so I just want to make sure I reintroduce myself every time I do a video. So my name is Asha Creary. I am a licensed professional counselor here in the state of Texas and an approved licensed professional counselor supervisor in the state of Missouri. I am an educator, I am a mentor, I am a clinic director of a private practice that I own here in the Austin, Texas, or Central Texas area. Now we have 2 locations. And so that's just a little bit about myself. So as we jump into this particular section, Section 5, this is the largest section of the exam. And it includes a lot of information. And one thing I want you guys to remember as you are going through the subsections of Section 5, just think skills, intervention, which theoretical perspective is that, and what does that actually look like in practice? So this section basically says like exploring family member interactions, religious and spiritual values, building communication skills, all the things. But you want to be mindful that for this particular section, it is not going to be very straightforward. So your job is to make sure that you support your clients in the best skill or intervention that you could possibly use. And as you go through trying to study the information, I really want you to think practicum and internship and what skills and interventions that you use as things came up for your clients in the session and how did you address them. So think my approach when you think about counseling skills or interventions. The other thing you want to remember is that Section 5 and Section 3, they go hand in hand. They go hand in hand. And I say that because you need to be aware of the theoretical perspectives and theories that's out there. So psychoanalytic, you need to know what the goals of the counseling intervention is for or going to work through or support your client through. But you're also going to need to know what skills do counselors need to be aware of specific to psychoanalytic. Okay. So be mindful of that. The test is not going to be straightforward. You're going to get some theory attached to a scenario, and then it's also going to be attached to what are you going to do with this now that you know what theoretical perspective you should be using for this issue. And then the other thing to remember is that you're going to need to be aware of like the cognitive distortions that are out there, but you also need to be mindful of cognitive distortions that a client may present with. So just keep those things in mind. You're going to want to know cognitive distortions, counseling skills that you would use, basic counseling skills such as listening, empathy, reflecting, linking, the words that describe what you're actually doing with the client within the session. But then if you're also going to want to be mindful of the theories. So I'm going to stop babbling about that and let's jump into these questions. Oh, before we do that, let's break it down. So this particular section has 30% or it's 30% of your exam. So it's about 48 score items. So if you notice, I mentioned that Section 5 and Section 3 go hand in hand. Section 5 is equally as big or is a little bit bigger than Section 3. So if you got the theories down packed, skills and interventions is going to be 10 times easier because you know the theorists, you know what their goals for counseling were, and you know what their approach is. So when you get into skills and interventions, their approach included skills and techniques that you need to use for your client based on the modality you are using with your client, if that makes sense. So that's why Section 5 is equally as big as Section 3. All right. Let's jump into the questions. So, client, I feel like if I spoke my mind, everyone would judge me and nobody would be my friend. Therapist, it sounds like you feel afraid to be your authentic self and that people would leave you if you did. What counseling skill does the counselor response represent? All right, it is reflection. So it's not interpretation because I'm not interpreting anything that the client said. The client said that nobody would be my friend and people would judge me. That's what they said. Confrontation, you're not challenging them or you're not forcing them to see how their maladaptive thoughts are not adaptive or not productive to them. And then summarization, you're not summarizing it, you're reflecting the information. All right, which of the following is an example of confrontation? So I'll give you a little bit to read through the answer choices and answer that. All right, so it is A, the counselor empathetically challenges their client based on their disconnect between wanting to maintain a healthy, sober life and their actual actions. Sorry, y'all, there's a typo there, but based on their client's disconnect or cognitive disconnect there. It is not C because C is summarization. It is not B because that is reflecting, and it's not D because that's just basic active listening. You're listening to your client and you're responding using empathy. All right, a client comes in and expresses that they have been struggling with overcoming stress and they are not in control of their life. What should the counselor do? All right, the answer choice is C as in Charlie. So you would not challenge the client's irrational thoughts because these aren't irrational thoughts. The client is basically clearly stating that they are struggling and they are stressed out and they feel out of control. That's not an irrational thought. That is a true feeling or experience to that client. You wouldn't spit in a client's soup here just because there's nothing to spit in, if that makes sense. Ask the client the miracle question. The client isn't saying nothing ever works out for me, woe is me. All they're saying is, I am struggling right now and I feel overwhelmed and I feel out of control. So asking them the miracle question of something along the lines of, well, what would happen if everything went right? That wouldn't necessarily be appropriate here because all they're saying is they're acknowledging that they are struggling and that they don't feel in control of their life. So your job would be to do some psychoeducation around learned helplessness and help the client identify their ability to take back control of their life. That is your job. Your job is to empower your client and help them get out of feeling stuck. All right, you have an 18-year-old client who is struggling with anxiety. Which of the following is not a cognitive behavioral therapy technique to best support the client? All right, discover the meaning. Discovering the meaning is not a cognitive behavioral therapy technique. When you think cognitive behavioral, think thoughts, cognitions, and behaviors. Behaviors, you would pattern track if there's something that the client is engaging in that's causing them even more anxiety. Thought stopping, we're not going to engage in maybe the symptoms associated with anxiety, which would be possibly like recurrent thoughts or intrusive thoughts or worries or fears that a client may be experiencing because they have anxiety. And then you would engage in relaxation skills because that is going to help you change the cognitions possibly, and it's also probably going to help you change the behaviors that's causing them to engage with things that's causing them to be anxious, if that makes sense. So discovering the meaning is not a CBT technique. A client shares in a group counseling session that they recently, or shared in group counseling that they recently came out to their family about their sexuality. The counselor points out that another group member had a similar experience. This is an example of what? All right, it's linking. If you just know the basic definition of reflection, diagnosing, and redirecting, you know that those words don't align with just the statement alone, even if you didn't know what linking was. And if you think about linking, I am linking one experience from one client to another client. So it's to show connection. That's what linking is doing. All right, Ashley is seeing a new counselor who believes that our goal is to bring the unconscious into the conscious. The counselor tries to help the client work through unresolved developmental stages in which Ashley remains stuck in as they work through depression. She uses techniques like dream analysis, analysis transference, and resistance. The therapeutic modality being used best describes this therapeutic approach. All right, so psychoanalytic / psychodynamic. So if you think psychoanalysis, think Freud, think free association, think dream analysis, think analysis of the transference that they're experiencing, think analysis of resistance, and think interpretation. The others do not align. They just don't. All right, a client is diagnosed with depression, suicidal ideations, and auditory hallucinations, suddenly appears to feel better and they are no longer hearing voices. Their risk of suicide is now what? Okay, it is A, increase. And I know you're like, what? It means it's decrease. No, it's not. And here's the rationale behind it. Suddenly, when you see the word suddenly feels better and no longer hearing voices, and you see suicidal ideation in the same sentence with auditory hallucinations, just because they're no longer hearing voices and just because they appear to feel better doesn't necessarily mean that their suicidal ideations have decreased or that they're no longer at risk. Again, C and D are the same response essentially. So if C is not correct, or if C is correct, that means D has to be correct. So if you think about the particular answer choices, if somebody's experiencing depression and they have suicidal ideations and then all of a sudden, oh, I'm better now, I'm good, y'all can let me out, I'm not having these thoughts anymore, they've probably made it up in their mind that they're going to commit. So just be mindful when you're answering questions around suicidal ideations. What are the telltale signs that somebody is going to actually commit? Now, I don't know how much in your program y'all actually went into deep into suicidal ideations, but keep that in mind. When a client has determined that they are going to commit, there's usually telltale signs such as they feel better, they're happy, they are giving away their things, they have found new meaning, and they suddenly just feel better. Like, oh, all of their problems are just gone. Those are signs that someone's suicidal ideations or their risk for suicide has increased. Now, had the response been their auditory hallucinations have significantly reduced, still there, and that their suicidal ideations went from suicidal ideations, feeling better. When you think about suicidal ideations and feeling better, if a client says that they're feeling better and they no longer have ideations, that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't still have that plan or their intent. Now, if the answer choice or the response to it or the thought to it had said the client no longer has a plan, no longer has the intent to commit, they found peace in where they are in life, and they came up with a goal or a new plan for themselves, then that may signify that it has decreased or that they're no longer at risk. But this person just out of the blue is feeling better. Suddenly is your keyword. A client may use the ego defense mechanism of repression in order to do which of the following? All right, block unpleasant emotions. So C is to negate. C, negating a previous experience is going to be suppression. B, redirect unconscious impulses is going to be sublimation. And D, retract to an earlier developmental stage is going to be regression. So you need to make sure that you know the difference between those ego defense mechanisms. Now, there are like 3 or 4 more ego defense mechanisms. So if you don't know those, get on Google and search for ego defense mechanisms, because I guarantee you there is going to be a question about it. And one question I always tell people can make or break you. So just make sure that you at least know what those definitions mean and what they look like. All right, a 7-year-old client with separation anxiety begins to hyperventilate when their parent leaves the counselor's room. Which of the following is the most appropriate response? All right, it is going to be B as in boy. Help ground them by engaging in breathing techniques. Now, answer choice A. Touch is usually not appropriate when working with clients in general. Unless you are a behavioral health tech working in a hospital setting, you're probably not going to be touching your clients at all, regardless if they're hyperventilating or not. Probably not going to be touching your clients. Now, if your kid is touching you because you're doing play therapy and they're hitting you with a fake sword, that's different. But you're probably not going to be engaging with touch with your clients. Now, again, if you're in a school setting providing counseling, that may come up because kids like to hug in school settings and it's normal, but it's not something you're probably going to just be freely engaging in, if that makes sense. C, telling a client that it's safe to sit down now is not appropriate. The client has to feel safe on their own. So making them telling them it's safe doesn't make them feel any more safe. All right. Having their parent return, for answer choice D as in dog, having their parent return to the room could be counterproductive to what you and the family plan to engage in regarding maybe the counseling goals that y'all came up with. So that probably wouldn't be it either. All right. I think we're down to the last question. Yes, we are. All right. So which of the following is not a technique a REBT counselor would use when working with a client through their emotions? All right. It is D as in dog, interpersonal disputation. That's one is not a technique used in counseling, period. Interpersonal disputation is not. So techniques that an REBT counselor would use or interventions or skills would be the ABC model, which is to activate the event, belief or thought process, identifying what that is, and then emotional consequences. So that's what the ABC is: activate, belief, consequences. Other techniques or interventions or skills that a REBT counselor would use would be cognitive disputation, imaginal disputation, behavioral disputation, emotional control cards, confrontation, and encouragement. So those are things that you would see as an REBT counselor. So that is it for section 5. In the next video, we are going to get into section 6, the breakdown for that. And then there will be another video for section 6 questions. That one will probably be relatively shorter just because that section only has 9 questions or 8 questions. But I digress. We'll get into that later. So hopefully this video was helpful as far as how to answer questions and how to break down in the information and the best way to approach the questions and how to tap into your short-term memory to bring about the experiences you had in the field and how that applies on the test. So see you guys in the next video. Bye.